fucking get up.
Pig, it's 4 in the morning.
Well, that's your fault for being born in a country on the wrong side of the fucking planet. Listen, I am sick of these people demanding an F-111 video. All I hear every day is Vark, Vark. When is the Vark coming out? When you doing the Vark? No.
So why not just pump one out?
No. You are the plane boy. You know the funny plane's funny American boy. Get your ass on it!
Alright, give me a sec. That's right, we're talking about the F-111, guys. Now this thing is pretty controversial. And by controversial, I mean to say that if you know what you're talking about, you probably love this plane and appreciate the technological innovations for the day it had. If you're of the reformer mindset or work for an overhyped corpo YouTube channel trying to rage bait people, then you're wrong. Look, I used to be a skeptic of the F-111 when I was an edgy teenager too, but when I started digging into the capabilities of this bad boy, I was convinced. The Aardvark was an awesome piece of American aviation. So good that even the Australians loved it.
In the next century, when today's military aircraft are evaluated by future historians, this one may be rated as the best for its task ever designed.
Let's rewind the clock. The F-111's origins can be found in the early days of the Cold War. Back then, you had a multitude of different aircraft tailored to specific duties. You had fighters like the F-86 or F-104 meant to tangle with other fighters, interceptors such as the F-94 or F-102 meant to tackle bombers, and then you had fighter bombers which were, well, less meant to fight other aircraft and instead make high-speed, low-altitude runs to deliver bombs. These weren't like heavy bombers which were large and meant to strike from high altitude, but smaller aircraft that scaled well with their air-to-air brethren. The whole reason fighter bombers like the F-105 came about was to deal with an increased threat in the form of Soviet surface-to-air defenses. During World War II, Nazi Germany experimented with guided rockets intended to shoot down bombers. However, it was in the post-war era that you started to see more intricate designs intended to work in conjunction with radar-guided AA artillery. The United States was concerned that the Soviet Union would be heavily defended should a nuclear strike be ordered, and by the 50s, the Soviets had developed a vast air defense network not seen before. Among the threats to American bombers were Soviet KS-19s, 100mm cannons able to engage targets above 40,000 feet with their SAW-9 fire can radars. In addition, by 1956, Moscow was ringed by S-25 Berkuts, also known as SA-1 Guild missiles by NATO. The first-generation Soviet surface-to-air missiles were static, but a massive threat to B-36 peacemakers should they have to strike Russian cities. The next year, the S-75 Dvina, or SA-2 Guideline, was deployed in the Soviet Union. The Guideline could be moved via trucks and set up in areas where the SA-1 couldn't. The SA-2 was a two-stage missile that could reach over 80,000 feet. In a very Soviet move, the SA-2 was widely dispersed to warpack nations as well as Communist China. The threat became real on October 7, 1959, when a Taiwanese RB-57 Canberra was flying a reconnaissance mission over Beijing. There, it was shot down by a Guideline. The SA-2's true capabilities were shown off less than a year later on May 1, 1960, when a U-2 spy plane flown by Francis Gary Powers was shot down at over 60,000 feet. The Guideline crew also shot down one of their own MiG-19s during their attempted intercept, but the point still stood. Surface-to-air missiles were a true threat for aircraft flying at any altitude. Flying high was just not enough. Around this time, the US Air Force had been developing tactics for a low-altitude interdiction mission, the thought being that if a bomber flew low enough, it would be impervious to radar locks with all the terrain clutter around it. Needless to say, when we became embroiled in Vietnam, this theory was heavily challenged. Navy A-6 and Air Force F-105 crews were rudely surprised when SA-2s were easily able to lock onto them at near treetop level, even at night. So what was the solution? Get even lower and even faster. The US Air Force wanted a new low-altitude interdiction aircraft, even as the F-105 was coming online in the late 1950s. In addition to shortcomings with the actual penetration duty, fielding such aircraft required long runways as swept-wing fighters of the day had high takeoff and landing speeds. A straight-winged aircraft would allow for a lower takeoff and landing speed and reduce the need for long runways. At the same time, though, such a plane wouldn't be able to get up to speed for supersonic strikes. In June of 1960, the Air Force put out specification SOR-183 for a high-speed interdiction and strike aircraft, capable of an 800-mile range. Its low-level run-in speed was to be no less than Mach 1.2, but also features short takeoff and landing capabilities. This is around the same time the US Navy was looking for a replacement for its F-4 Phantom for fleet defense duty. They needed a plane with a long loiter time, a high top speed for intercepting bombers, and also allow for lower landing speeds. So why not make a plane that could do both jobs? SecDef Robert McNamara strolled up with his concept for an inter-service aircraft platform that could share the same general fuselage, engines, and offer other parts commonality. It's because of him around this time that you start seeing mass adoption of the same boots, uniform patterns, and weaponry among the 4 branches of the US military. When it comes to planes, that's when you start running into issues because, on paper, having the same airframe tailored to each service's needs sounds great. And in modern times, it's definitely more feasible. Back in the 1960s, however, it was a lot more complicated. McNamara issued the Tactical Fighter Experimental Program to aircraft designers to try and make a universal aircraft that could do the jobs normally covered by half a dozen planes. General Dynamics, once an electric boat manufacturer in the 20th century, had by the late 50s merged with the Canadair and Convair aircraft companies. Competing with Boeing, they put forward a proposal for a TFX Sentry, an extremely large, twin-engined aircraft. Their ace in the hole was implementing a new wing concept: variable geometry. In order to offer high speed, the wing was designed to sweep back, then shift forward to a straight configuration for takeoff and landing. The 2-man crew were seated side by side in an escape capsule, which was seen as a safer ejection method at high speed. General Dynamics' bid was chosen over Boeing's by McNamara in 1962 as it offered more parts commonality between the Air Force and Navy variants, and was soon dubbed F-111. The F-111 was a massive aircraft. At 74 feet, 6 inches long, it was 2 inches longer than a World War II-era B-17 Flying Fortress. The new design was powered by a pair of massive Pratt & Whitney TF-30 turbofan engines with a combined thrust of over 50,000 pounds with afterburner. The F-111B was intended for carrier use and had a shorter nose to allow easier storage on a busy deck, and was fitted with the same AUG-9 fire control system as seen in the later F-14. And yes, it was meant to carry the AIM-54 Phoenix missile. Unfortunately, the F-111B was just too damn big to operate safely from carrier decks. The decision was made in 1968 to cancel the naval variant of the F-111 and focus on the Air Force A model. The first production F-111s arrived in Air Force squadrons in July 1967. Now, there were 3 main lines of Air Force models produced through the lifetime of the aircraft. The F-111A was intended for Tactical Air Command for conventional low-altitude strike missions. The F-111A's avionics suite was made up of the General Electric AN/APQ-113 attack radar fixed to a Texas Instruments APQ-110 terrain-following radar in the nose cone. The terrain-following radar displayed incoming terrain to the crew and was even mated to the automatic flight control system. The advanced setup allowed the pilot to fly hands-off at high speeds down to 200 feet. Texas Instruments, the champion of terrain-following radar and pocket calculators. The A model could deploy over 31,000 pounds of bombs from its internal bay. Everything from Mark 82 freefall bombs to Blue 107 Durandal cratering bombs were carried by the F-111 through its career. The other aardvark, the FB-111, was deployed by the Strategic Air Command. The FB-111 differed from the TAC variant in that it had a longer wingspan and modified aft section to better facilitate carrying nuclear weapons. Fuel capacity was expanded for longer missions, and stronger landing gear allowed for heavier takeoff and landing weights. Later versions of the FB-111 could also carry the AGM-69 Short-Range Attack Missile, or SRAM. That packed a W-69 warhead with a yield of 200 kilotons. As a replacement for the B-58 Hustler, the FB-111 was on standby for the nuclear mission that luckily never came. Now, there was a third F-111 variant called the EF-111 Raven, which involved refitting F-111As with electronic warfare equipment. These came in the late 60s as a replacement for the Douglas EB-66 destroyer and would become the backbone of tactical electronic warfare formations into the 90s. It's important to know that the F-111 never received an official nickname from the US Air Force, but the moniker Aardvark stuck in reference to its long nose. And I can see the resemblance. As Aardvark is Afrikaans for Earth Pig, another name for the 111 was simply the Pig. The F-111A was first deployed in combat in March 1968 with the 474th Tactical Fighter Wing. The wing, intended to trial the new aircraft in combat, conducted 55 night sorties in Southeast Asia, but there was a huge problem. 2 F-111s were lost to unknown causes. The Air Force continued operating the aircraft despite the losses, attributing their disappearances to ground fire, but the real answer came on April 22nd when aircraft 66-0024 suffered a failure of a hydraulic control valve for the horizontal stabilizer. The failure caused an uncommanded pitch up, which departed the aircraft and resulted in a crash. All F-111 combat operations were immediately halted until a remedy was found. The second deployment of the F-111 in Vietnam was much more successful. As part of Operation Linebacker 2, Aardvarks conducted over 4,000 combat sorties with only 6 aircraft being lost. The Aardvark was loved for its low-altitude strike capabilities, and a single pig could carry the same bomb load as 4 Phantoms. Thanks to the massive fuel load, they could strike from their bases in Thailand without needing to refuel, which was another massive perk of the plane. After Vietnam, the F-111 continued to serve with immense success. On a 13-hour mission from RAF Lakenheath, F-111s escorted by EF-111 Ravens struck targets in Libya during the 1986 El Dorado Canyon raid. The Aardvark's crowning achievement was yet to come, however, in the 1991 Gulf War.
Three, two,
My position
one.
for about 10
Should
miles.
be impact. Boom! Oh, yes! Coming right.
Plus 19. Buddy spike base plus 19.
The Gulf War is still one of the most successful implementations of air power in history. Almost every type of military aircraft took part in the gargantuan operation, and of course, the F-111 did its part. By now, the F-111 was upgraded to the F model, which had upgraded TF-30 engines, a strengthened wing box, and could even mount the AVQ-26 Pave Tac laser designator. The designator allowed the Aardvark to carry laser-guided bombs, adding precision strike to the aircraft's resume. Before thrusting his forces into Iraq, General Norman Schwarzkopf wanted the Air Force and Navy to plan for at least half of all Iraqi armored vehicles to be destroyed from the air. In December 1990, the exercise Operation Night Camel, they really called it that? Okay. Night Camel was conducted with various aircraft mounting precision-guided weapons. The operation found that flying from a medium altitude allowed for the best envelope to identify, laze, and bomb a vehicle-sized target. This was a departure from the F-111's modus operandi. Normally flying at medium altitude put the Aardvark at risk of anti-aircraft defenses, but a Night 1 strike to disable Iraq's command and control and SAMs in a decapitation strike would make subsequent bombing missions more feasible. A 4-ship formation of Aardvarks packing laser designators and GBU-12 paveways was the winning combination. A term for striking targets in this matter was coined by the pilots: tank blinking. This wasn't well received by Storm and Norman in an exchange with General Chuck Horner that went something like this. Tell them to not call it tank blinking. That's the surest way to get them to call it tank blinking. Throughout the short and violent Persian Gulf War, F-111s alone counted for 80% of precision munitions dropped in combat. Now, you all know the A-10 Warthog is often called the tank buster, and it did the job well enough. It nailed 900 armored vehicles in the conflict while losing 6 aircraft. The F-111 knocked out 1,500, which was about a quarter of Iraq's 6,000 or so inventory in 1991. All without losing a single plane. So why is that? As Iraq's strategic air defenses, including their SA-2s, were mainly destroyed early on in the war, it allowed safe medium-altitude operations free from smaller air defense assets like manpads and AA guns. A-10s, on the other hand, had to get low to hit their targets, which put them well in line of fire of the shoulder-launched SAMs and such. Granted, A-10s weren't really on hunter-killer missions like the F-111 and were primarily acting in a close air support capacity, both of which are completely different jobs. That being said, there was one EF-111 Raven lost in the war when it hit the ground attempting to evade an Iraqi fighter. On the flip side, another EF-111 had the opposite effect, driving a Mirage F-1 into the ground that was chasing it with the help of an F-15 Eagle. All in all, the Persian Gulf War was the conflict that silenced the critics, and while its contributions have largely been forgotten in recent years, it really was the backbone of the coalition's tank-busting efforts. Of course, all good things have to come to an end. One of the big faults of the Aardvark was that it was expensive to maintain. In the mid-1990s, the F-111 was retired in favor of more modern aircraft like the F-16 that could do the same job in a smaller, more cost-effective package. However, its story wasn't quite finished yet.
The Royal Australian Air Force now has a plane that has a strike capability that will be available to this country for a long time.
Did you say how long, sir?
it would certainly be flying well into the 80s and probably beyond that.
While the F-111 was shopped around to various countries including the UK, the Australian Air Force was the only other adopter of the pig. In the 1960s, the Australian government sought a replacement for their Asian Canberra bombers and eyed the new fighter as early as 1963. There are a lot of Australian politics involved in the selection process, and I'm gonna gloss over that as I'm a silly American, but I suggest reading up on it. There was even a consideration for the US to loan Australia a B-47 squadron in the interim, but that was decided against given it wasn't that much of a jump from the Canberra in capability. The F-111C was a specialized variant developed for the Australian Air Force, combining the airframe of the A model with the longer wings and hardened landing gear of the FB-111. Initially, the order for the first batch of 24 aircraft was to arrive in 1968, however delays prompted the US to lend Australia 24 F-4 Phantoms until the aardvarks could be delivered. Finally, after 5 years, the first F-111C was turned over to the Royal Australian Air Force at Nellis Air Force Base on March 5th, 1973. The Aussies used their pigs for almost 40 years to great effect, and although it never saw combat, it was a force to be reckoned with in the South Pacific. Nothing for 1,000 miles could outrun her, outfly her, or carry a larger payload. Oh, and this is some crazy shit. So, the F-111 has a fuel dump port between her engines. As the fuel is expended, it could then be ignited by lighting off the afterburners. US pilots were told strictly not to do this, but the boys down under made the dump and burn a staple of F-111 airshow demos. Like, this has no actual combat usage, but it is one of the coolest things I've seen an old fighter bomber do. While they were replaced by F-A-18s in 2010, the F-111C is still an Australian icon. Not bad for a Yankee-built plane, I'd say.
She's Yankee-built, sir.
It's honestly a shame we haven't seen more F-111 action in media because it really is an underrated plane from a historical standpoint. Let's see, they show up in Red Dawn attacking Soviet armored columns. It's in the Angry Video Game Nerd movie. Oh, there's this cool Dale Brown book called Iron Wolf where F-111s operated by a PMC are upgraded with F-22 avionics. That's a cool idea. Oh, right. In 1965, James Rosenquist painted an 86-foot-long image of an F-111 as a statement against Vietnam and consumerism, I think. I don't know. It looks hard, though. Regardless of a big media presence, the F-111 was a huge step in strike aircraft design and laid the groundwork for future planes like the F-15E Strikey. Wait, who the hell?
Get in the Vark, Falcon! Get in the Vark! We're gonna go fly the Vark, Falcon! Get some chemicals in the
get in the
wings!
damn
We're gonna go to Moscow! We're gonna go turn it into a green can!
Alright, I'm in. Thanks for watching, guys, and of course, here comes the patron roll. These guys are the ones who keep my wallet lined just enough to continue making content. I can't tell you how much it means to be able to do this. Special thanks to Captain Fantastic, Deuce, Ghoul, Iron, Jake Fuentes, Kodai, Private Petey, Aspen, Weefy, Boats FG, Strider 1, Fox 2, and Caleb Corey. I also want to remind you guys that I'm still working with Car for Ukraine to hook up the 129th Lahit unit with a truck to support their future drone operations. If you're able to help out even a little, it will go to an awesome cause and help them keep pushing back the Russian invaders. That being said, keep that sun on your back, gang. Have a good one.
Falcon, they're outside my door again. I can hear them. They want me to do the F-111 video again. I don't know. They just keep running at me. Just keep sorry. I'm sorry. I was sorry, but they just keep here. They got the F-111. The Fox thing with the Fox.